Hi, third grade teachers. It is good to see you, albeit asynchronously and remotely. I know that some of you are probably familiar faces. It's been a while since we've worked together. Others of you might be new to me, in which case it is so nice to meet you. I am so glad to have some time to work with you asynchronously. Just so that you guys know, obviously I was with the Reading and Writing Project when Nimitz and I worked together. Gosh, that was probably 3 or 4 years ago now. And since then have moved back to the Midwest and am really having the opportunity to work with schools in lots of different ways, which has been great. I don't work with the project anymore. I just work on my own, and very much so I'm still steeped in that work, but I'm also just grateful that I can embrace different structures. And one of those things that I have embraced this year is getting a lot of time with different CUSD schools, specifically on Wednesdays, where we've done some different professional learning as you guys have navigated this crazy and turbulent year. And so I am hoping I can bring to you just some ideas, some food for thought, some thinking that has been helpful to people across the year. And obviously, specifically thinking about some of the topics that you guys had shared with admin in this, and then decided on this asynchronous recording option. So that's who I am. That's why I'm here. I am going to, I'm going to think about our time together today. When Celestine and I planned our time, we thought, okay, an hour of PD for each group. I am going to deliver. If we were live, we'd be stopping and processing and talking along the way. So I'm going to deliver content. You might want to pause the recording along the way and talk to each other or type things or find things. I also have created a lot of resources that I have added to the agenda. So when we finish our time together, you could always spend some more time perusing those things. So we'll see it as kind of this asynchronous time, guide your own learning, but certainly doesn't have to just be the Megan dump, although that's what it'll sound like for a little bit. So with that said, I know that the topic, two topics you all wanted to talk about are two of the topics that honestly are closest to my heart right now, because they are two of the most challenging things here during this crazy year. And I think the first one, I am so glad that you guys identified this as an area to want to focus on, is student independence. And I think any year this needs to be a focus, but this year more than ever, thinking about how to support, and not only support, but increase independence is essential. I think we have all seen our learners who are either independent or not independent. And it's been very clear this year who they are and what they might need. And so I think it's really important that this is a topic we tackle. I think especially as we near the end of the year, and I think that they are going to come back at some point. And if they've been getting a lot of parent help and they've been very dependent on the teacher or supports, and not all of them have parents at home to help them, but they've just been dependent on ways that maybe they hadn't before. Just thinking about ways to increase some independence at this point in the year is essential. And then obviously, you also asked about small group instruction. So that'll be a second big part of our time together. Student independence and then small group instruction. And as you'll see, I included some different resources that will help. The first thing I just thought I would share, and you can definitely take a look at it, the agenda, is this. Like our goal at the end of the day is to have students be productive. And our, sometimes I think about school and I'm like, shouldn't we just rename school to be massive productivity or massive practice? And so just when we think about student independence, it's not, well, maybe it's because we want to do less as teachers. I'm kidding. But we've got plenty on our plates. It's not just because I can't get to everybody. Like independence, even if it was student one-on-one, I would want us to increase independence. So it's not just because we're spread thin or because they don't have supports at home, but it's because when you practice and you're productive, you're learning and growing. So just simply starting with students and thinking, how was your productivity? Were you at a 1 or were you at a 10 or were you somewhere in between? And just kind of maybe you make this a new rhythm where you say to students, as we near the end of the year, we're really going to be working on student productivity. And so each day or each week, we're going to do a check-in. Are we at a 1, 2, or 3? Where are you at on a scale of 1 to 10? And saying to your kids, let's make it a goal to be more independent between now and the end of the year. I'm going to go ahead and go through just a handful, like 5 or 6 things that I was thinking specifically for Nimitz third grade teachers when it comes to increasing independence between now and the end of the year. And hopefully some of this will give you some food for thought. The first one, I just talked and showed you that chart of productivity. And I even mentioned that you might set some goals around it or look at it as a class. So my first tip for you is to say to your students, we're nearing the end of the year, and maybe we have a goal for reading or a goal for writing or a goal for math, or maybe we don't, but we're gonna make a goal for ourselves, and it could be a goal of the month or a goal of the week, but we're gonna set a goal around a habit. So setting goals around habits is something that I think we let go of often in our teaching, but I think it's really important. And specifically, we can set goals around independence. Now, that might seem kind of lofty for a third grader, so have them work on setting a goal for volume or stamina, what we do at the beginning of the year, but let's do it again now. And maybe they just keep track of what their volume and stamina looks like. Have them set a goal around their use of tools or have them tally every time they use the checklist or every time they use a chart, make a tally of it. So have them tally that number of times they're using charts and tools. You could even have them tally or set a goal around the number of questions. For some kids, it could be ask less questions, and for some, it could be ask more. One of the things that we'll talk about right here, number of questions, I think we've talked about this before, but when we finish a lesson, doing a question-free zone. You've heard me talk about that if we've been live. And if you haven't, asked some of your third grade colleagues, because I know some of you, and I know we've talked about this, but I think it's something that we've forgotten about right now. And students are right back at the asking 1,000 questions. So establish this question-free zone as you move into the end of the year. But making it an all hands on deck goal, I think, is really important. I've even been thinking with like setting goals and making it all hands on deck. Obviously, it's something that you want to be between teachers and students. You want it to be between students, not just individuals, but also whole class goals. But I'm also thinking parents, and I know that we have some parent support, and then in other areas, we wish we had more parent support. But if there are parents who are helping kids, to send home a little note or to make it clear to say, parents, this includes you. We're working on our independence. So if you could help me between now and the end of the year, really every time your student asks a question, every time they ask for help, ask them what's their goal for doing that independently. What's their goal? And they might not, the goal in the word independent might be a lot, but just thinking more about on your own or answering your own question. One of my favorite things to say to kids, and I've said this before with you guys, but I trust you to answer your own question. And teaching parents that little phrase could go a long way. At any rate, I hope this helps. One thing we can do is we can have students set goals. Another thing we can do, so I'm gonna do actually like 3 major things. Another thing we can do is we can teach students to lean on each other to increase their independence. So there's teachers and then there's students, but getting more of that student to student practice is a middle ground. And so when we increase more student to student, they're increasing their independence and reliance on the adult, whether it be a parent or the teacher. And so a couple things that I've been doing that have been working is one thing I've been doing is creating a lot more club work. And even if we're not in a reading or writing club unit or a reading club unit, could you create little mini productivity clubs? So at the end of your writing session or the end of your reading session, you say, meet with your club, check in with your club. What can your club help you with? So just getting more student to student interaction is going to increase their independence. Some teachers I worked with this year supported or built accountability clubs. And actually when students come back in person, this could be something good to think about with the students who are at home versus the students who are at school. And an accountability club is just somebody I check in with on Seesaw. An accountability club is somebody that I share with at the end of the lesson. An accountability club is just a way for me to see my peers work more often. what students are missing right now that's decreasing independence is table groups. Think about the table groups that they sit in or used to sit in last year at this time. Isn't that crazy to think? It was nearing an end. But those table groups were a really great way to support independence, because if, you know, Joey is doing his work and he says he wants to think about what Jose is, or he looks over and Jose is sitting there and isn't doing anything. Well, Jose can look over at Joey's work and be like, well, Joey's doing this. And then Jose's like, well, maybe I should be doing this. Or Katrina's sitting there and she's stuck and she's not sure what to do. Well, she can look at her table group, or she can say, hey, Jose, what am I supposed to be doing? Or where's that chart? Or do you have this? Or sometimes the kids say it to each other. Jose says, hey, Katrina, get this out. So thinking about how to recreate some of that will support more independence. I also think that when it comes to this, obviously thinking about book clubs and thinking about ways, instead of letting go of them this year, leaning into them this year is really helpful. I put a document in a way that can be better explained than me sitting here and rambling at you all. But there is a document linked in the agenda that says Book Club Considerations 2020-2021. And it'll give you a lot of ideas of how to use clubs or how to gather groups together, student to student, to increase some of their independence. And so I specifically put that together for you all, and I think you'll see that it'll lead to some good thought for your units, your research club unit that they'll move into at the end of the year, or if you're still in character study. And I think that will really help you. And then one more big category, and it's going to lead to another one, is just to remind your students to lean into tools. And by leaning into, it's leaning into and using tools and resources and charts that we give them. I've referred to these before as silent teachers. And now is a great time in the year to remind students of all those tools and resources that we have, and really making a point of every day before you get started, hold your tool up. Whereas your silent teacher, we're going to wait to begin. And I actually think that the beginning of March is a great time to do this. You could say, hey, third graders, let's just brainstorm. What are all the charts that we have? What are all the teachers we have that don't talk? They're going to be like, what are you talking about? And then hold up something, hold up an anchor chart and say, does this look like a teacher? They're going to say, no, that doesn't look like a teacher. It is. What could this chart teach us? And have them brainstorm all the ways that chart can teach them things and help them to be more independent. And that will help them to increase their independence. So if they make it a goal, if they use each other and look at each other's work more as a way to kind of get them rolling again, and if they lean into the tools, this is all going to support their independence. I think about myself, and I think about when there's something new that I'm learning, or if I'm going for a run, or I'm trying to work out for longer. I think all three of these things are helpful to me, right? So let's just go with the exercise thing. If I want to increase the time I'm working out, if I want to go for a longer run, well, first of all, I need to set some sort of goal around that and say, okay, you're going to go for maybe like a 20-minute run instead of a 5-minute run. So I set a goal for that. And I might ask somebody to run with me, or I might ask somebody what their thoughts are, or I might have somebody just say, Megan, did you run today? And ask me about it. And me having to say yes or no makes me accountable. And then last but not least, I don't know about you, but like sometimes there's apps now on your phone. There's all sorts of things. I love the Peloton running app. And if I use this little app and listen to it when I run and listen to this coach talk to me, it's a silent teacher that's going to be getting me doing more. So these setting goals, student to student or peer to peer, or other people holding us accountable, and then leaning into our resources and tools is not something unique to third grade, and is not something unique to pandemic teaching, but is something that's really important to always increase our independence. Now, this year more than ever, really focusing on these three things between now and the end of the year will only help your students to increase their productivity and their overall independence. One more thing I want to just share with you before then we segue into some small group work thinking. I want to just remind you that okay, so we have workshop and we have our mini lesson or our direct instruction. And then we have all this independent work time. And during this independent work time, I might be pulling small groups or working one-on-one, talking in a perfect world right now, not a pandemic world. But one of the forever challenges is how to get students to be more independent right here. And of course, I just shared 3 pretty basic things, but let's dig a little deeper. And I know I've shared this with you all before, but there's something that I think will be a helpful reminder to you in just bringing these pieces together. And it's what I will refer to, and I know we've talked about before, as a cycle of independence. And I think it's a good reminder for you at this point in the year to just to remind yourselves that there are students who are very dependent or have a lot of dependence on the adult or the teacher. All of a sudden they go and do something on their own and we're like, woohoo, you got it, you're independent. Or you've got independence, great, you can zip your coat on your own, you can tie your shoe on your own, you didn't ask a question. But the minute they struggle in the pre-pandemic world, they'd come find us. They'd come like hunt us down. They'd be like, Miss Megan, what am I supposed to be doing? And we could get them going again. Now in the post-pandemic world, I think they just stop. And so what we need to happen is that we need to break this cycle, because it can't be that the only way you're independent is to go to find the adult in the room. So the middle ground, and again, I know I've shared this with you guys before, is what we call interdependence. And interdependence, sorry, I knew that was too short. Interdependence is that reliance on peers, is that reliance on silent teachers. And so teaching students that when you are independent and you're stuck or you stop, what can you do to get yourself rolling again? And the goal would be to use something to be interdependent on something so that this cycle can continue, instead of it being this cycle stops because I can't find the adult, or I don't have an adult at home, or my teacher's busy, okay? So at the end of the day, I think keeping this in mind and keeping these 3 major things in mind will really help us to increase student independence between now and the end of the year, okay? Now would be a good time to pause. If you need to pause, we are going to segue into thinking more about small group instruction. So if you want to pause and even take a look at some of the tools and resources that I've given, you could do that now. Now would be a great time to do that, or to just pause and like open up your plan book and make a plan for how you'll do more of this in the next few weeks. Now would be a great time to do that, to say, when am I going to teach these different things? When am I going to remind kids of these different things? Make a plan for what this is going to look like now. So go ahead and hit pause if that's something you want to do, and then we'll segue right into thinking about some small group teaching. Okay. So if you paused, you paused. If you're back, you're back. I'm not going to pause just so this can all be in one recording, but I am going to move us into thinking more about small group teaching, especially given the constraints of this year. And I know many of us have worked together before, and we've probably done a lot of thinking around small group teaching. And I know that this year it probably feels like, gosh, that's the last thing I need to be doing. But I would actually argue that it's one of the best things we can be doing. Because when we think about small group teaching, I'm going to tie the pieces together, and we think about increasing independence, they don't have to stand alone. When we think about small group teaching, I've been referring, I think this has been since I've worked with you guys last, but I almost think it should be, instead of called a small group, we should rename it. It goes back to what I said about school being massive practice. Let's rename small groups to be pocket of productivity. A pocket of getting students working more. It's like if you go, I'll use running it for an example. If I go out for a run and I've got a coach or somebody watching me, I'm more likely to go further. Or if I go to the gym and I've got some trainer that's working next to me, I'm going to do a lot more than the few random curls that I'm going to do on my own. So small group is a great time for us to be that coach and students to be really productive. So see it as a pocket of productivity. I also think that when small groups are done well, small groups can be supportive of independence because they can either help to explain to kids what a whole group learning means so that they can do it more independently, but it can also teach kids that during this independent time, so it's number one, giving them skills that they can be doing here, but it's also a chance for me to be that coach on the sideline and get you feeling what it means to practice with a coach's eyes on you, so that when the coach's eyes aren't on you, you know what to do. So small groups can be really supportive of those things. Of course, small groups are also supportive of student to student because they're working in little groups. They're working with 2 students or 4 students. So it's a great chance for them to see each other's work, for them to come together. So just remembering that although these 2 topics seem different when you guys shared them, I very much so think that they're related. So if these are 2 of the major goals of small groups, okay, and I guess I would also put here that obviously it's also supportive of independence and differentiation. And by differentiation, I also differentiation. I also mean access and giving access to all learners. Next year, they're going to use the word acceleration a lot in education and how to accelerate kids where we know that gaps maybe fell. But small groups are all productive or are all helpful for those things. So what do we do? So when we think about small group teaching, yes, we know these things to be true. But what are some things that will help us lead small groups, specifically thinking about 2020, 2021? So, okay, we've got small group teaching, we have these things, but when we think of this year or we think of remote teaching, what are some specific considerations? So here's just a handful. The first one, focus on one thing across multiple days. So instead of doing something new every time a small group comes, work on the same thing for a series of days. Consider it like a series of small groups. So if I have a group that meets with me on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m., maybe for 4 weeks in a row, I'm going to focus on the same thing with this group. It's not going to be something new. It's going to be the same thing for these 3 days or 4 days so that I'm not every single time just starting fresh. And this means that we might teach less, but I actually think you'll get more mastery because it's not all this like different every single time that they come. I also think that if kids are coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays or meeting with you on Tuesdays and Thursdays, at this point, they've probably gotten to know each other. So make it feel like a club. And you might even say to that group, hey guys, we're nearing the end of the year. Will you pick a book that we all want to read together on Epic? Or will this group, can we celebrate some of the things we've been learning as this small group? Or I was thinking today, we would just play a game to get to know each other more. Or let's play I Spy with each other based on our environments that we've been seeing for the past 6 months or whatever it is. But make those groups feel like a club, especially towards the end of the year when they've all gotten to know each other. It's a really great way to make it feel productive, but to also get more of that student-to-student collaboration. If it does feel like a club, you are going to get more student follow-through and accountability if they're feeling more like a club. And in order to get student follow-through and accountability, think about ways that they can share with each other. So they can share on Jamboard, or they can share something that they're working on Seesaw. So some of your Cupertino colleagues at another school, each small group has a Seesaw page, and they have to take a picture of something that they did. It's actually a first grade room. They have to take a picture of something that they did and put it on the Seesaw page for their group to see. Or you could do the same thing on a Jamboard, and the group could have a shared Jamboard. But think about it almost as like a group notebook or a group chart or a group document, and let them take the ownership. It doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to look fancy, but it's definitely something to think about for them to be doing the follow-up. I also think that with this, give yourself time inside of the small group for sharing and follow up more than we would in a normal year. But if my Tuesday, Thursday group is signing on, maybe this day, I'm just going to say, let's share with each other. Talk to me about your characters. What have you been noticing? Give us some evidence. I'm not going to teach you anything new today. Let's just share with each other. Let's talk to each other. Because then as they're sharing and following up, you're doing your assessment. It's formative assessment. Also, as they're sharing and they're following up, if they didn't do the work, it starts to become really transparent to yourself as the teacher, and that can lead you to new next steps, but also to their peers. And that can support some accountability and some follow through. So just, I guess, maybe being more casual is the right term of this right here, but feeling less driven by so much content and more driven about, like, I can do all the content in the world, but if they're not independent, if they're not using any of this, then it's not gonna help. If it's not gonna help them when they go to be productive on their own. So just think about just reshaping and reforming small groups to be more of that interactive club that we know is something that can be really, really powerful. And I guess the other thing is to just think about our resources for planning. And when we think about planning and we think about content for our small groups, I know we can get really overwhelmed by all the things that we have to focus on, but I'm going to give you just a couple reminders. First of all, use the unit of study videos. Go back to old sessions. Go forward to new sessions. They're not perfect, but use them. We have access to them, so use them. And look to those resources as places to help you. Another thing to focus for planning and content with reading specific is really focus on the reading skills of each level. And I shared a doc actually, and you'll have a chance to look at this after we finish, but I shared a doc that I put together last spring with a school I work in that helped us to just focus on or looked at focusing on the most important reading skills at each grade level or each book level. And you might lean on book level. I know if we have below benchmark readers, it might not be by grade level, and you could even get rid of the grade level. But this doc that is also linked to your agenda just gives you the most important things that students work at each level. And so really zooming in on those things over zooming in on the things that are the content of the unit. So feel free to use this form to help you plan. I think it'll be tremendously helpful. I went ahead and you'll see it highlighted right there. It says reading skills, and I think that will help you. I also recorded a handful of asynchronous small groups. And so you could also refer to this doc on this sheet to get some asynchronous small groups that might be supportive of the work that students do. Last but not least, I just, as I'm looking at this, I also copied the small group phonics book from grade 2 that's really helpful for word work. And so if you're looking for a resource for word work for particular groups of your students, you can go ahead and look there. Long story short, there is no shortage of resources. There's the unit of study videos, there's reading level skills, there's the asynchronous small groups that I recorded that might give you some ideas. Take a look at that doc. And then there's the phonics small group book that I just shared from grade 2 that could also be helpful. So I think any of these things are things to lean on to make your life easier so that when you get overwhelmed by all that there is to teach, you can say to yourself, okay, but where can I go? I think the key with all of these things is that they're skill focused and not just master the mini lesson focus. And sometimes when we lean so much on master the mini lesson, we forget what's most important. And what's most important are the reading skills and the phonics skills that they're using to read, which would be decoding, and then to write, which would be encoding, okay? So nothing brand new, nothing earth shattering, but I think definitely some considerations for this year and some good reminders. And I think at the end of the day, meshing together small group instruction with that student independence is something that's really important for all of our learners. One final thing that I want to just remind you all, or remind this group, is that when we do have increasing independence, it's a good thing because students get more time to practice, right? And we know it is true of any skill. The more that I practice, the better I'll become. If I want to learn tennis or golf or piano or whatever, I need lots of time to practice. And the more time I practice, woohoo, getting better, getting better. But that means that if I'm doing the practice and my running coach isn't doing the practice, or my teacher isn't doing the practice, my practice might not look as good as theirs. So my piano teacher could sit there all day and crank out some beautiful tunes. But when I sit down, it might not sound as good, but I'm learning more. So all to say that when you increase independence and productivity and put more of the learning on the student, the output sometimes looks worse, but the learning is stronger. If the teacher is doing a lot of the work and the dependence is high and students are just like living here, lots of dependence, lots of dependence, lots of dependence, the output of what they do is going to look better because you did a lot of it. Their parent did a lot of it. They got a lot of reminders. And so we're like, yes, that looks better. But if they can't do it again on their own, then the learning isn't the same. So as you start to, or just remind yourselves to continue to make the shift to increasing student independence, increasing student productivity, remind yourself that it's not always about mastery. I actually just reminded the primary teachers of this in a session that I recorded, to remind yourself that when we are teaching students and students are in school and they're learning something new, they are living in a place of approximation. An approximation is practice. Approximation is learning something new. Approximation is me trying to figure it out on my own. And the more I live in approximation, the better I will move to mastery, or the more I will move to mastery, or the better I will master something with more independence. So just remind yourself of this word, approximation over mastery, approximation over mastery. And I think that will help us. As teachers, we like control, and it might help us let go of some of our control and increase some of that productivity and independence. Sometimes what gets in the way of student independence is that when they feel stifled or they feel held back by having to be perfect or having to make their output exactly what the teacher wanted, and pulling back some of that and letting them take more ownership is going to help them in all of those areas. I hope that this helped. I know you have a little bit more time now where you can peruse those resources. I want you to take some time with those resources. Again, you could have paused this along the way and looked at those then, but I am here if you guys want to reach out, if I can help you in any way. You know where to find me, and I hope our paths cross again soon. Happy March. Thank you for all that you do. Anything that you do in the spirit of student learning, especially this year, is well worth it. So thanks, guys. I hope we see each other again soon, and we'll be in touch. Bye.